Hello, good friends and super fans, or both. Welcome to another episode of the Chris Endrey podcast. Today's episode, we're doing a listener suggestion. It was sent in by my friend Gus, who said that he would love for me to do an episode on brainrot, AI slop, short form content, and what this is doing to us. It's a topic that has come up a few times already in the podcast, but it is really exciting for me to get to do a bit of a deep dive into it. And obviously exciting for you too, because I put the call out to my Patreon patrons to see what they wanted me to look at this week. And it was the winner by a pretty comfortable margin. So if you're unhappy with this week's topic and you want to be shaping what we're looking at in the Chris Endrey podcast, feel free to join up at patreon.com/Endrey. You can vote in these sorts of things, even in the free tier. But yes, I've been getting lots of lovely feedback on a number of recent episodes, and thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. It's really nice. If you have been enjoying any episodes in particular, please do feel free to share them with anyone who you think might like it. And hopefully we can get to keep making more of these. But today we have to explore whether or not our brains are falling out of our heads because we are using phones all the time. Is it the worst thing that's ever happened in our whole society? Is it broadly totally fine? Or is it, could you believe, probably somewhere in between those two? Find out on the other side of the music. Okay, runaway brain rot. What are we looking at? Do you even know the term brain rot? I hope so. But if you don't, I'll inform you that it was the Oxford University Press's word of the year for 2024. And they describe it as the supposed deterioration of a person's mental or intellectual state as a result of overconsumption of material considered to be trivial or unchallenging. It's kind of characterized by Gen Alpha and Gen Z, who seem to be the most self-aware of this type of phenomenon through kind of archetypal low points of content consumption like Skibbity Toilet, Ohio memes, etc. But I think generally the idea that using our phones for all of our information all the time and consuming to the bottomless feed of scrolling content, we can look more broadly to how that may be impacting our lives. And I mean, it's kind of scary to face, at least it is for me, because I mean, what would my next hour look like if I didn't have my phone near me? What would my next day look like? My next week if I didn't have access to mobile internet? My next month? You amplify that across a life, and that was everybody's life until very, very, very recently. And I think you can agree that it would be radically different, better or worse. Those are value judgments, but certainly different. And the way that it's shaping our brains and bodies, absolutely real. Study after study supports that the way in which we consume content is reducing our memory, our attention spans. It's occupying more and more of our time. It's shaping our physical bodies. I don't know about you, but it used to be that your index fingers were the strongest part of your hand, and now it's the thumb, which is alarming. I always think about when they dig up, Ötzi the Iceman or whatever. They could deduce things about the society that people lived in, the way they lived their lives based on their skeletons. And it's a nightmare to me that someone would dig up my skeleton in a few thousand years and realize that basically all I did was sit down and eat warm meals. Yes, but to start off, I just want to make sure that we're not dealing in some sort of unnecessary moral panic because, every time something new comes out, rock and roll music or, I don't know, two-handed broadswords or whatever, the people who grew up without those things will find fault with them, and there'll be a sort of generational tussle. But in this one, it seems to be much more than that. Firstly, because it seems to be the generations that are the most impacted that are ringing the alarm bells and most concerned. But also, while you do find that sort of moral hand wringing that, when I was young, people on the bus weren't all just looking at their phone as though that meant that they were all talking to each other, which I'm sure is slightly true. It's much bigger than that. I think it's important to say this is a much more dynamic and wider reaching phenomenon than we give it credit in our day-to-day life. I'd say it's so impactful that it's kind of hard to talk about in in its actual terms without sounding like an alarmist. And I want to be really clear that even though a lot of the topics I look at in this show are sort of to do with the great enshittification of everything, I'm actually an extremely optimistic person and quite zen about, people being addicted to things or people enjoying themselves or big changes that come through and, the loss of everything that came in the past. I'm often pretty fine with that. But this one, the more I did research into it, the more I've thought about it across the last 10 years, and mostly just based off my own behavior, the more kind of dramatic the shift seems to emerge as, because day to day you kind of don't notice if there's a new app that you start to use or, your phone gets slightly better, so you use it more in different ways in your life. But as somebody who was born and lived most of my underage life without a phone at all, in fact, I was a late adopter and got my first phone when I was 17 or something like that. And even then it didn't have mobile internet or anything like that. So having had that chunk of life experience, and, I think I was 12 or something before we even got internet in the house. So I imagine it'll be compared to not having electricity or something like that in the future. But having had that window of life experience, I feel like I'm relatively well equipped to look back and to notice what's radically different about how we live our lives and spend our time now compared to then, and how we feel about it all as well. And these feelings that I personally have do seem to be borne out in study after study. There's problems with studies, there's problems with this sort of unknowability of such a dynamic impact. But I think what's clear is that it is enormous. And yeah, let's start to look at some of the consequences and how they play out. Just to back up my claim that it's study after study, I thought it'd be respectful to you to give some word from the experts, because I'm not an expert. As much as you trust me to be correct about everything, there are other people that are only looking at this stuff, and they've got ideas too, and we may as well hear them. So back in 2018, that's almost a decade ago already, a decade of data analyzed by leading memory psychologists at Stanford University found that people who frequently engage with multiple online platforms have reduced memory and attention spans. I mean, it's like hardly surprising to hear that stuff, is it? But in recent years, an abundance of academic research from institutions, including Harvard Medical School, the University of Oxford, and King's College London, found evidence that the internet is shrinking our grey matter, shortening attention spans, weakening memory, and distorting our cognitive processes. The areas of the brain found to be affected included attentional capacities, as the constantly evolving stream of online information encourages our divided attention across multiple media sources, memory processes, and social cognition. High levels of internet usage and heavy media multitasking are associated with decreased grey matter in prefrontal regions. People with internet addiction exhibit structural brain changes and reduced grey matter. I mean, it's hardly surprising, right? If you were to take a population of 10 people and suddenly give them a type of cherry that was so much more delicious than everything else, they ate it to replace everything else, and they geared their life around acquiring these cherries, and they spent 6 hours a day doing that where they would have previously spent time doing other things. I mean, it's unsurprising that would lead to a refocusing of how you structure your cognitive faculties and how your brain is wired. So I think the restructuring itself is not necessarily that alarming. It's more what the consequences of that might be. And I kind of think that maybe they're, again, maybe huger than even the alarmists think. I'm a huge user of these products, and I'm in the infinite scroll. I'm in the, I'm not a Luddite. I see the benefits of all of that stuff as well, which is why it exists, which is why it sort of creeps in, which I'll get into a bit later. But yes, I think the main point that I would like to make in this whole episode is that even when you have mild changes to the structure of your life, that can have radical consequences as a result. And this kind of follows on from last week's topic of the sort of non-linearity and non-fungibility of things. You might think that because you spend an extra 20 minutes in your afternoon doing one activity instead of another, that it's like a zero-sum plus or minus 20 minutes, but it's kind of not, because of the dynamics of how your habits work and the dynamics of how you make decisions and reach for things. So, for example, I used to read a lot. I love information. I love ideas. And kind of as the quality of accessibility, really, rather than anything else, of mobile internet has gone up, my reading of books has gone down. And that's not because I find it to be a superior experience. It's because it's easier broadly. And how much easier is it to pick up my phone than a book? Not that much easier. I mean, it just happens to be that my phone is probably in my pocket or within reach, whereas a book might be a couple of meters away in the places that I spend most of my time. But that's a 10, 20% difference in difficulty, it doesn't lead to a 10, 20% difference in the rate of consumption. In my personal experience, in this particular instance, it leads to basically 100% difference, where every time I'll reach for my phone when I'm looking for something to read, and I will never reach for a book. It's a bit of an exaggeration because I do still read, and I do also try to do things to mitigate phone usage. But that's just one tiny example across the panoply of things that you could be doing with your life. And it speaks to a concept that we looked at last week, opportunity cost. If you didn't listen to the episode of economic concepts and how they can improve your life and how they can improve our society, please do, because it maybe sounds like a really boring topic, but I think it was a really interesting thing to dive into. And if you bailed out early, I'd give it another crack. In any case, opportunity cost relates to the time that you spend doing something could be spent doing something else. So say, for example, in the evening when you lie in bed next to your partner, if you have one, you both reach for your phones and you spend 20 minutes scrolling on your phone instead of going to sleep. That alone could account for the plummeting collapse in sex that people are experiencing, or that alone could end up robbing you of an hour's sleep every single night. And what's that going to do across the arc of your life? I mean, it's impossible to say. There are studies that look at this sort of stuff, but again, they're too dynamic and complex. But what you can be certain of is that it's going to be impactful. If I were to tell you, even the amount of sleep that you have now, if I was going to take an hour of sleep from you every day for the next week, you would accept that they would have consequences upon your life. And yet, it sort of sleepwalks in because it's quite easy to use your phone to do everything, because it can do everything. There's a reason we all sit around like Gollum in the Ring, staring at our phones. It's because it's compelling, because it does offer incredible, useful, magic access to everything that we would struggle to live without, and that does enrich our lives in multiple ways. And that's the nefarious thing, and that's kind of what I guess Gen Alpha are memeing about with the sort of skibbity toilet type of energies. Because okay, you've got this noble concept of like, oh, I can access the world's information, I could get in touch with anyone, I'm empowered to do everything, and I don't even need to move my arm. And yet, what am I doing? I've just realized I've just spent a few hours scrolling through nothing, and I'm at the point where I'm like, the toilet. Like, it's funny, but also it's an alarming truth. So those sorts of like small exchanges and tipping points that are actually quite large now, as we sort of spend, I think the average adult is on their phone 6 hours a day or something like that. They reach tipping points where there are actually total collapses in certain phenomena, certain parts of society. People are having far less sex. People's mental well-being is kind of reported across the world to be in decline. It increases in anxiety and depression and isolation. And interestingly, loneliness seems to be one of the driving factors behind that. This is also these are pre-COVID trends. So that's a huge rip in the fabric of time, but it was actually happening even separate to that. Lots of reports of struggling with productivity despite the wealth of tools that we have, and changes in public participation and how we participate both democratically or as volunteers. It's hard to get good data because these are murky spheres to document. But I just think that you could see how just the raw opportunity cost of people spending more time socializing on their phone means they're doing less socializing in person. A common complaint is that young people don't know how to connect to each other romantically or sexually. Sort of all the cultures of courtship have been obliterated. Some of that's good, some of that's bad, but you can't deny it's an impactful thing. There's also so much going on in the world at the moment that to attribute just the decline in well-being to mobile phone usage would be disingenuous. And I wonder how much of it is a chicken and egg situation where, there's economic hardship that you experience because you can't have the baseline that previous generations had, or whatever, for whatever reason, housing. And so instead of, you feel less comfortable in your own life, so you then turn to the sort of numbing calmness of looking at content on your phone. Or like, where just 2 generations ago, there were maybe, say, if you're in Melbourne, there were 600,000 cars on the road, but now there's 2.5 million cars on the road. So every time you do anything, it's harder and it's uglier and it's less pleasant and you take more time. So it's more stressful. So you look at your phone more than you perhaps would. Or, how much of that decline is because of the phone usage, and then how much of it is because of other factors kind of doesn't really matter. But I do want to be sympathetic to those causes. Major one that I think about all the time is that basically every human generation until the last couple, but especially now, lived within a short walk from clean water that you could drink, or, animals that you would see in their native habitat, or you could see the stars at night and live in darkness. That was actually one thing I really noticed when I lived in Brunswick. I was like, it's never dark. And then once the pandemic was over and I was able to get to somewhere dark, I just felt really like, oh my God, I felt like my soul re-entering my body or something. And that's just such a small thing that, I had not noticed for like a couple of years there. But also the loneliness one. Again, every generation across the thousands of human generations until the last couple, you would live within a short walk of your family and your closest friends. And now who can say that is true of them, a minority of people? And yes, that stuff has real impact. So, if picking up a phone and doing some doom scrolling is a way of processing that, I don't begrudge it. I just think that it's worth examining, because probably based on your values and what you want to do with your time, you probably want to solve those problems as best you can to reduce that. And that's something else, actually. I noticed that whenever I am in a place like my friend lives in South Durras, which is a quiet town by the beach in the south coast of New South Wales, Australia, every time I'm there, I actually never even reach for my phone in a way that I normally do, because I'm just so present in the beauty of the complex networked natural world and hanging out with friends and the fulfillment of physical exercise and all that sort of stuff, that I notice I actually don't give a shit about what's happening on Instagram or whatever. And it's not that I normally really give a shit about it. It's just that I normally reach for it because it sort of fills some hole or something like that. Maybe that's an interesting idea. One interesting example of the small shift, huge consequences for me is the taking of notes. We're preparing for basically anything, including this podcast. I have a physical book of notes that I like to use because I kind of do everything by feeling. And for some reason, just I feel better doing stuff with pen and paper than I do on computers. I must have some sort of chasm in my frontal cortex or something where if a note is typed into a computer, for me, the files and everything, they just disappear and it doesn't really seem to exist. And that's quite lucky for me, it turns out, because there's now plenty of solid evidence that the handwriting of notes leads to much better retention and engagement with the information that you're taking in than typing, despite the fact that you can type, twice or three times as fast and consequently chunk through much more information. And it's probably because of that slow pace that you do have to engage with the information that you're putting down, but also there's a different sort of tactile experience to what you're creating. And also potentially it could be that there's fewer distractions because, if you've got a pen and paper, it's hard to open a new page and see what all your friends are up to, or open another page and see what's happening with the war or whatever it might be. But yes, you retain information far more that you write than you do by type. And, this is just a small thing, but what's happened in the last couple of decades? Well, basically 100% of everybody who's doing any writing or learning or explorations, I mean, it's not 100%, but it would be above 90, have switched. It used to be 100% of people that did write, and now it would be probably single digits that do it as everybody types. In just this one thing, what might the consequences of that be on learning and cognition? Because there's a connection between deep learning and the writing that you don't get with typing. So if you just think everybody has abandoned that opportunity with the time that they're spending note-taking, and then what are the consequences of having everybody in the world having abandoned that sort of deep learning and connection to the information that they're spending their time working on? I mean, it's immeasurable and, to my mind, terrifying to think about for such a small thing. And this is just one of a million areas of life that have been completely obliterated by the way in which we consume and interact with information and the world at the moment. Like, do you want to be operated on by a surgeon who has typed their notes instead of handwritten them? I mean, I don't want to be operated on by a surgeon at all. The idea that everybody that we're interacting with has engaged in a lower form or a less effective method of learning and engaging with the information that makes them an expert is something to raise your eyebrows at. So as I said, I take notes for this podcast in handwritten form, but I'm still not immune to it. I reach for my phone like a tick throughout it. I mean, I must have looked at it just in the few hours that I spend researching and writing for this episode. I must have looked at my phone 20, possibly even 50 plus times. And each time that's splitting cognition and focus. And is that leading you to getting a better quality podcast that's been better considered? No, again, just on the raw opportunity cost. Even if the activities that I'm doing with that time aren't damaging and are nourishing, which then I don't think they are so nourishing. But even if they were, just the raw cost of that split focus is each time I'm in a lull and I pick up my phone instead of just sit there with the thoughts, I'm robbing myself of the opportunity to make the abstract connections and to stumble across things just through, neuron firing or whatever, or to take that deeper learning. And it's frightening to think of what might have lived in that space of boredom and gaps that I'm plugging with what, like looking at tennis highlights. And I mean, if I'm lucky, it's content that's interesting to me, which is the wild thing about it. And while I'm on the podcast itself, I mean, my episodes are 30 minutes to an hour. That's not by design. It just seems to be the organic amount of time that I spend exploring these topics, because my goal is to usefully go across the ideas without too much fluff, and also without adding unnecessary drama, or without padding just to fill it. I like to spend that time on these episodes because I think it's what it takes to explore them properly. But every incentive is there for me not to do this, because I release these episodes and I see the metrics of how they go. And sort of, I mean, the ones where you can see me on YouTube, they sort of get, 30 to 50 or 100, if I'm lucky, views per episode. Whereas the short form cuts of like individual points that I might make within it, they get thousands of views. I mean, so across all of that, it's like hundreds of thousands compared to hundreds. So the incentive is super clear. I should just make 30-second grabs of a particular topic, but I don't do that because I don't think that that's how you can usefully explore something. And that's just for my content exactly as it is. I like to be measured in how I explore things and be open rather than declarative. But if I were to take sort of a moral lens and take an absolutist position on anything, that would go far better. All the incentives are there for me to do so, because it tickles that dopamine hit of an absolutist thing. But that content, if your only point of engagement on a topic is to consume content like that, not only do you not get the details and nuanced understanding and perhaps measured approach to how to critically think about something, but often that will supplant further investigation, because you see the end form position, it's compelling to you. No need to then, read about the details of something, because an opinion has been presented to you, particularly if it's something that's not that important to you, or if it's something that's harder for you to access information around or to think about. Maybe it's a complex topic. So, I mean, this is kind of famously the Dunning-Kruger effect, where the more you know about something, the less you think you know about it, and the inverse, the less you know about something, the more you think you know about it. So it's very easy for our feeds to be flooded with basically the people that know the least about stuff being the most certain and bringing the strongest emotional valence and the strongest declarative statements, because they outcompete the uncertainty of examination every time. What do you do if all your information universe is built around that stuff? Terrifying. And the incentives are there from how all these systems are designed, which I'll go into a little bit. So the reason that we have this race to the bottom and technologies like infinite feeds and likes-based algorithms and attention span retention is because the companies that run all of these platforms, their sole metric for utility is the longer that you're looking at it. The amount of time you spend looking at your screen is great for them. It's not great for them if you spend 10 minutes a day looking at something, have an extremely rewarding engagement, go away, live a richer life, etc., because you're not looking at as many ads, basically. And so all the incentives are there for the structure of these products to engage you. And they've gotten really good at it because, in the past, if you released, say, a book and then saw that it had sales and, you get reviews and you'd get this feedback from a few people, and you find out what works and what doesn't. Okay, the next book we as a publisher are going to put out is going to be more like this and less like that. And, that's a years long process, and you're only getting small information inputs. With phones, you are getting millions of data points from everybody every single second, where you know exactly how many people are looking at something, for how long, where do they touch to look away, at what point are they not interested, at what time of the day do they pick things up, what type of content do they want to look at then, etc., etc., etc. There's just so much more, the exponential growth in the capacity to A/B test what works, what doesn't, constantly. And to reiterate that, I mean, it's why it's sort of creepy, if you're a TikTok user, what a fantastic job it does at bringing you the content that you like, because it can do all that testing and know instantly. It doesn't need too many iterations to know what type of thing you and as a result, people that are like you are interested in looking at and then presenting it to you, which makes you look at it for longer, et cetera, et cetera. None of that at any point is based on how enriching it is for you as a user or how useful it is for the species or anything. It's all just raw, hold the ring, look at the ring, stuff. And it taps into your hindbrain, which is where the brain rot idea comes in, because you're not even necessarily consciously engaging with this. In fact, you're probably unconsciously engaging with it because it just fills an increasingly deep emotional need, which it can create and then re-fulfill, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of this is predicated off of our evolutionary instincts, survival instincts that we historically have needed to stay alive. We need to be aware of threats. So that we really light up when we see particular types of threats and give them a lot of our cognitive energy, because, those rustle in the bushes, if it's a tiger that's going to kill you, that's a huge consequence. Or if there's a social conflict and you have a big falling out with someone or whatever, that could be a threat that kills you. Or, even just being exiled from a group is something you really need to worry about and give emotional cognitive energy to, because in the past it could mean survival. Whereas now that's not the case, but these instincts are hijacked and enslaved. Particularly noteworthy is intermittent variable reward, which you may have heard of, which is, I guess it must be from questing for food and things like that, which is where, you want to look at every bush in the forest because at one point, one of them will have blackberries and you can feast and gorge or whatever. Or you want to be looking all the time for game because at some point, it's not going to be all the time, but when you do see it, it is really rewarding. So you spend a lot of junk time doing things that don't matter, because whenever something that does happen, which will happen at random intervals, that is really rewarding. And so it's kind of the same with scrolling content. You might look past a bunch of guff. You're like, oh, I don't care. Even just on Facebook, which is so dank now, you might be like, oh, great aunt's birthday. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, fine. Ad for shoes, don't care, whatever. But then something really interesting at some point will come up. You're like, oh, for me, like AFL coach's press conference. Oh, that is interesting. I'll look at it. And this type of stuff is extraordinarily well known and totally hijacked. It's why pokies are so addictive, because even though, unless you're really cognitively challenged, that when you sit down at a pokies machine, that it is designed to extract money from you. And at an exact ratio as well. It's like it pays back 80-something% of the money that you put in. It's different, I think, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But even though that, you sit down and it's so rewarding for the people who use them, because you hit the button, spin, 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 nothing. No. Spin, 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 spin. Ooh, I got a couple of bucks for my $1. Spin, 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 spin. Anyway, they know this stuff and they meter it out so that you sit there as much as possible. So that even if you win $100 for your initial $5, you will at some point, if you stay there, continuously play, you will lose it all back. You'll lose 100% of that money back at some point, because obviously once you run out of money to gamble with, you need to get more money, which is how the whole thing works. And it's the same with our phones and time, except for at a much more advanced level with a much better capacity and all of the world's sort of points of interest used as the levers of reward. So you're up against it. You're really up against it. And I'm up against it. I hate this. I'm fully aware of it and I hate it. And I do basically nothing to stop it. Now and then I'll turn off my phone or leave the house without it. And if I go like a couple hours, I feel like I've won some huge battle. And the crazy thing is, if I forget my phone and go somewhere, I'm so much more happy and present. I have this idea that I'll be there'll be an emergency and I'll need it. So I should bring it just in case. But the actual emergency is that I'm holding it all the time. And if there is another type of emergency, guess what? Everybody around me has a phone as well. I can solve that problem. So it's so insidious how it just creeps into you like a parasite and stays there. And this is known by the people who design them. And not all of them are sort of cold-eyed, market-based psychos. And so, you get whistleblowers. Now probably you just get people that wouldn't be attracted to it. But in the past, when they were designing these things, there were people who were sort of uncomfortable with what they were knowingly doing at these retention factories, Meta, Google, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Possibly one of the more noteworthy ones is former Google design ethicist Tristan Harris, who told US Congress in 2019 that billions of people now receive their information from platforms whose business model links their profit to how much attention they capture, creating a race to the bottom of the brainstem to extract attention by hacking into our lizard brains into dopamine, fear, outrage to win. Persuasive technology is a massively underestimated and powerful force shaping the world. It has taken control of the pen of human history and will drive us to catastrophe if we don't take it back. Now, this guy's not a moron. This is his whole thing. He's coming from inside the tent to say this, and this is his focus. And do we get the sense that people are generally that concerned about it? I think more likely what we see is debates around screen time and, just sort of cultural hand-wringing and moralizing and things like that. But, I'll say it again. Persuasive technology has taken control of the pen of human history and will drive us into catastrophe if we don't take it back. That's a pretty stark statement to make. And tellingly, look at revealed preference and skin in the game. The people that run these tech companies, they don't let their own children have smartphones. They don't let their own children use these products. It reminds me very much of, I went to state school in Victoria, Australia, Koonung Secondary College, and it sucked. It was such a bad school. I understand it's improved, so sorry if you run it or whatever and you're listening, but it was a bad school. And the teachers there, they didn't send their kids to that school. They sent their kids to private schools. Teachers at a state school, then they're making what, $50,000, $60,000, and they're spending $10,000, $20,000 of that per child to send their kids to a private school because they know that they wouldn't let that junk into their kids' lives. They know that the skin in the game, because they knew just how shit that school was, and they were not going to let that happen to their children in their own workplace. And it's kind of the same of, does the CEO of Domino's eat Domino's every night? Of course not, because they know it's absolute poison and it ruins people's lives. But are they happy for other people to eat it every day? Of course, because that's money for them. It's the same with these tech things, but times a billion in terms of the impact. They don't care at all. Not only do they not care at all, it's the opposite. They make their money from sort of the deeper the brain rot grows, the more powerful they become. So we can't depend upon them to turn this ship around. So then who do we turn to? Who's going to step in? So say it is even a fraction as bad as Tristan Harris and I guess increasingly me think. Who's going to step in? Who can we rely upon to fix it? Obviously not these corporations, because the more time you spend looking at anything, even if it's just a dot moving back and forth, and you throw away your whole life to stare at the dot, and you rush home from your job to stare at the dot, and you're staring at the dot whilst on the bus, that's good for them. That's a big win for them. Doesn't matter if you burn every element of your society to do it. It's good for them. So we're not going to depend upon the companies. They're not going to do anything. What about government? Governments themselves, can we rely upon them? There are movements, but I would just broadly say that they are woefully inadequate. So Australia has the strictest movement on this so far, where they've banned social media accounts to people under the age of 16. I just think that that's so circumventable. Like people that were my age, if we were all suddenly kicked off of ICQ, what would we do? Well, we'd just go somewhere else. So I think, the internet is so connected in so many worlds that, maybe people will reactivate Club Penguin or whatever. Does that still exist? There's just going to be ways around it. Okay, you're not allowed to have an Instagram account unless you tick a box that says I am over 16, or you lie about your age. It's not going to do it. There are other movements in the realm of pornography. Some of the porn aggregators are being compelled by at least Texas and perhaps Sweden, I think. I should look it up for you. Yes, in France, this is just last month, Pornhub, YouPorn, and RedTube, which are all owned by the same people, probably great people, they've pulled out of France because France brought in a law requiring strict verification of users to demonstrate that they were over 18. And while that's a strong statement from France to even have those laws, it's a big internet out there. You can imagine that if these products were taken away from you, and even if they'd worked and you were under 18 and you wanted to access porn, they'd take about 4 seconds to walk around that barrier. I think there's a South Park scene, it's from the movie, where the kids are like trying to access some sex thing, and they're just like, "Are you over 18?" Yes, and they just sort of begrudgingly clicking, "Yes, I'm over 18." Yes, it's like that's kind of what it is. And the same would be for social media. The instances where states can impact this are where states have enormous reach, say North Korea or the Great Firewall of China, or actually even the European Union has banned particular Russian websites in recent years. So it's not impossible, but they're just not likely to do it. And one reason is you don't want to live in the type of state that has that kind of access. So it's not an ideal solution in terms of control of your life and information, because do you trust a state to have your well-being front and center? History suggests that you shouldn't blindly do so. 2, they don't have the tools to do it. It's not so easy. But 3, The constant mobile internet usage is a wet dream for parts of the states. I'm talking about your three-letter agencies, your intelligence gatherers, basically. It's a wet dream because imagine in the past, if a state was interested in somebody who's doing some nefarious activities and wanted to know more about them, they'd have to have a physical person talk to them and follow them maybe, or go through their rubbish, all this sorts of stuff. Now, they don't have to expend anywhere near those resources. You could just find out for free where everybody is all the time because we're all constantly uploading data and, we're showing pictures of our own homes. We're showing what our interests are via our likes and dislikes. We're showing what we do at certain times of the day. I mean, maybe it's indicative that last month, in response to the Israel attacks, Iran asked people to stop using Instagram and WhatsApp. That's not because they're worried that people are having a great time looking at the West on Instagram or whatever, or chatting to people or being recruited to commit assassinations or whatever via WhatsApp. It's not for reasons of that. It's because they are literally just beacons transmitting where you are, and they make it a lot easier for people who are trying to assassinate people that are attached to those systems. Same thing across the board. Early in the Russia-Ukraine war, there were reports that soldier movement and individuals were being identified because they were inadvertently uploading to Tinder. They're having a scroll through Tinder, showing their location. Oh, it looks like there's 200 soldiers there. That must be a base. Boom, shell it with artillery or whatever. And citizens have done the same thing. Like, this is not even just with military and intelligence grade access to information. Citizens have found and identified secret military bases because soldiers would be inadvertently uploading their runs to Strava or something like that. So you could see, oh, look, Bob from Idaho's doing a 5-mile run every day for the last 500 days around the deserts of Gabon. There's nothing even there on the map. What's going on? Well, he's in some base. And sorry, I said deserts of Gabon. There's surely no deserts in Gabon. Forest, let's say forest. You get the point. That's just what you can get as citizens from the publicly available data. What are they doing with the rest of it? Well, just think idly, what could your government do with access to all of the information that your phone holds on your life? I mean, I'm just thinking easily stuff that, Joseph Stalin would have killed. Not that the killing was a big obstacle for him, but it's stuff that Joseph Stalin and his ilk would have killed for. They would have given a pretty percentage of their empire to be able to access the type of information on their citizenry that we give away for free today. Your constant location, every conversation you have, if you do things via the drive rather than Windows Word or whatever, like if you've got Google Docs, everything that you think potentially, if you're a note taker or a diary writer, conversations with friends, intimate things, like it probably, like if you've got a smartwatch, it could probably deduce the hours at which you're masturbating and your heart rate during that experience. Like you don't have to be too creative to imagine the depths of information that is accessible. So it's hard to see governments getting off of that teat. And it's not for nothing that the US government is trying to do everything they can to acquire TikTok. It's not because they have an interest in investing in content or being cool or whatever. It's because the security risk that something like that poses when it's held by a rival power versus the opportunity to have all that information for themselves is huge. I mean, you can profile people based on the content that they look at. I'm sure that if you wanted to, I shouldn't say this stuff because it'll flag my episode, but if you wanted to commit nefarious activities and you did even just some adjacent Googling related to it, people would show up at your door. Yeah, there are examples of that happening. And, that's a plus for someone who wants to live safely, but it certainly blows up your ideas about democratic mechanisms of accountability, because the people that can access that information are often not in any way in any line of jurisdiction that you have control as a citizen over engaging with. But that's another topic for another day. All this to say for now is it's unlikely that it's going to be our governments that are going to take care of this stuff. So it does sort of fall on you. What do you do with that? I don't know. What do I do with that? I don't know. Doing this episode and exploring it makes me think I want to do more, though, for sure. I think just having the understanding, it's not just the feeling of like, oh, skibbity toilet, that's funny. Oh, goodness, I'm wasting my life on my phone. I think it's fair to say that it is a radical intervention in our lives. And as such, if you want to address it consciously, you need to respond radically. So for me, I don't have the strength to get a dumb phone, I don't think. God, my life would be so much better, though. Life was so much better even without it. Don't know. don't know what you do with this information. I guess like the first step is thank you for listening to this episode and my own explorations of what the consequences might be and why that is the case. Because I think understanding a problem is the fundamental prerequisite to taking any action, and understanding its scope lets you put it in a hierarchy of how you deal with things and how you see things in the world and how you choose to give your time. So thank you for listening to the episode. And if you did find it to be an interesting exploration, I would love it if you would share it with anyone you think might be like-minded or get a benefit out of it. And if you really, really liked it, you can join up to my Patreon. The tier starts at just a few bucks a month or something like that. And it actually starts at free. But if you want to contribute financially, it's just a few bucks a month. And you get access to some extra stuff. But yeah, I mean, what do we do? I think small steps, in the same way as the small interventions have big consequences, I think small areas that you claw back can also have big consequences in terms of big benefits. So when I do something like songwriting in groups, I try to encourage everybody I work with, and if I'm in control of the space, I make it a rule to not use phones and to use pen and paper instead, because it allows you to be more present and have that tactile engagement and whatever. To do this episode, I thought it would be useful to have my phone at the other end of the room from where I am, so that I didn't instinctively reach for it and pause and like just check stuff out and, split my focus while I was doing it. That's something. As for more radical things, I mean, there are phone brickers, there are apps that you can do to control your time. I just think like rather than wresting back control through the phone, do it in the real world. It's only my personal thought, because I think you need to. I don't think you want to be doing a compromise. Like I just think see your physical reality as having primacy in how you engage with the world, and then just note what's happening in terms of how you use it. I don't want to give too much advice because because I haven't solved the problem, but two, I think if it was an easy one to solve, we would have solved it. Like I'm not doing an episode on how to avoid food poisoning because like we know how to do that broadly. Don't have the microwave chicken burger from Thailand. It was lukewarm and ruined my whole week. Yes, I think that the small things that you can do, not just for yourself, but with your peers, you can claw back some norms, not have phones at a dinner table or not have phones out when you're hanging out, not take a phone different places, whatever. Like these are such piecemeal things. Like I always say that if I could watch the film of my life, I would intervene with a pickaxe and wrest it from my hand and throw it into the ocean, which is not good for the ocean. But maybe it would be overall because instead of looking at my phone, I would spend that time atoning to the ocean somehow. Whatever. Ultimately, whilst I've been saying how worried I am about this cognitive tap and this, reduction in our capacities to do things as a civilization, do I think that this is the worst thing in the world? Absolutely no. Okay, so it's probably a huge tap on our well-being. It's a tap on our productivity, a tap on our innovation, all that sort of stuff. But I don't think necessarily the goal is to be as productive as society as possible or whatever. And I think that there are far worse traps that we could all fall under or idols that we could all worship or whatever it is. I mean, like, it's happening right now that people are completely mobilized to kill everybody else from another group by virtue of them belonging to that group. And that's a common feature of humanity, and it dominated the 20th century in a few notable ways. And, is that worse than everybody looking at their phone and not being able to concentrate on a newspaper? Obviously, it makes it seem not that bad by comparison. But I do think as an individual and maybe in your own groups and society, I just think that we can do better. And not only because we can, like you can always do better in whatever it is probably, but also I think we want to be doing better. So it's worth understanding the problem. Curious to hear your thoughts. If you have any, please do get in touch. If you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, you can leave a comment. And wherever you are, please rate the show 5 stars. Give me a like, throw a subscribe, send it to your friends because I want to keep doing this. It's so much fun. And yes, see you next week. Thanks so much for listening. Looking forward to being back with you again. Same time next week. Get off the phone.